everybody thinks dogs have a great sense of smell, but if you had a really good sense of smell, would you do that greeting thing they do where they stick their nose like right in there? You think you could do that from 2 feet away if you had a
Well,
really good sense of
I thought it was
smell,
because
right?
they actually like that smell,
Well,
but
that could be. That could be. So I don't know. I've never tried it, so I can't tell you.
fair
I have
enough.
no intention of trying it
I
either.
thought you were an experimentalist too, but
But there are limits.
welcome to the Shaping Science podcast, where we talk with experts from science, academia, industry, and beyond to explore the latest in research, education, and innovation for the public good. I'm Nick Dirks. I'm the president of the New York Academy of Sciences, and today it is my very great pleasure to welcome Stuart Firestein for a conversation about the science of smells, his book about ignorance, and advice for handling failure. Stuart, Dr. Firestein, is a neuroscientist and professor of biological sciences at Columbia University. His research focuses on the vertebrate olfactory system, utilizing it as a model to explore general principles of signaling and perception in the brain. Now, before his luminary period of being a biologist and academic, Firestein spent nearly 2 decades working in theater, which later not only made him one of the great teachers at Columbia, but informed his views about creativity and uncertainty, and I guess maybe even improvisation in science. Firestein is renowned for his efforts to make science accessible to the public, and he has written 2 books in particular that make that clear. One on ignorance, the other on failure. But he's currently at work on a book on hope, on optimism. So we'll have a chance to talk about all of that and more. But I'd like to begin with the neuroscientist and ask you, what was it about the olfactory system that got you interested in both that and the brain?
Yes, it began, I think, from my theater days, actually, since you brought that up. It's a secret I try and keep under wraps, but now it's public, so there it is. I was interested for a long time in animal behavior and in animal-human relationships throughout history, both in art and religion and science and all of these different ways that humans relate to animals and are part of the animal kingdom and are yet somehow different from it or separated from it and how all that. So I was interested in all these questions and had some ideas about putting together a kind of a group of actors and writers and doing a lot of improvisation, if you will, and coming up with a piece on humans and animals, a theater piece, a performance piece. And I did that.
So this is when you were
Still working in the
still working
theater,
in the
still
theater
working in the
before you
theater.
went back to college and
Yes, and as a result of that interest, I thought I'd never been to college. In those days in the theater, if you wanted to work in the theater in those days, you didn't go to college. You apprenticed yourself. Um, to companies, to people whose work you liked. So I schlepped scenery around, I ran around, got props, coffee for people, all of that kind of stuff. I learned lighting a bit and so forth, and worked with directors that I liked, and little by little worked my way up. I was mostly a director. I didn't do much acting in the theater. I was primarily a stage manager, lighting designer to some extent, and mostly a director. So, so I thought, well, maybe I should take a class or something in animal behavior and learn something about it, see what I could learn about it. And I happened to be involved in a show at the time that was a bit kind of a hit, and so I had my days free. So I went and took this class at San Francisco State University. I was in the Bay Area at the time. Took this class at San Francisco State University from a wonderful teacher, a great mentor as well, passed away a few years ago, I'm sorry to say, Hal Markowitz. And and I took this class first time I'd been in a college classroom. I was there with a bunch of 18-year-olds. I was 30 something or another, early 30s. And I thought, well, this is really cool. This guy stands up there and tells you everything he knows about something, and you get to sit here and listen to it. And I thought, who thought of this? I think it was like Aristotle or somebody, but I was just catching up with it. So he convinced me somehow or another that eventually convinced me. I took another class from him, and he convinced me that I should maybe get a degree in biology. I'll tell this very quick tangent of a story because it's
yep.
one of the interesting parts of how things that you don't expect in one field will be important in another. So he said, why don't you take a degree in biology? Take some courses. So I looked at the requirements, and one of them, of course, was organic chemistry, Orgo as it's known, the weed out
The
course,
weed out course, yes.
And I thought, well, this is going to be tough, but if I can't pass organic chemistry, then what's the sense of this? So I should take organic chemistry. So first I took a class in general chem to sort of brush up on my chemistry that I had not had since high school 15 years earlier or so. And I did all right in that. And so then I enrolled for organic chemistry. Now, the thing about organic chemistry that trips everyone up is that it's essentially about a vast amount of memorization. I mean, it's a beautiful field, organic chemistry, I have to say, but you have to memorize a lot of reactions. So there's one reaction scheme after another, and there's no way around it. You just have to memorize this stuff. But the thing is, I spent 15 years in the theater doing nothing but memorizing scripts. That's what I did for a living. So I had this great then ability to memorize stuff. I mean, I would start rehearsing a play, and within a week, I knew the whole script. I knew everybody's lines, and I even knew where the pages turned in the script. I just was something I could do. So I aced organic chemistry, largely because of my experience memorizing
Oh,
crap in
that's
the theater. So anyway, to answer your question, I know I've gone around the long way. How I got interested in olfaction is that having then gotten a degree in biology, I thought, well, I should tell everybody that, of course, a degree, an undergraduate degree in biology is fairly worthless unless you're planning on going on to medical school or graduate school or something like that. So that's the point at which I made a decision in
hmm
my career that yes, I would apply to graduate schools, and if I got in, I would give up the theater and go to graduate school and try a career in science.
But you weren't, I mean, many students take biology and organic chemistry for that matter because they want to go on to become a doctor, to go into medical school
Yeah,
and so
no,
on. That was not something you wanted to do?
that was not something I wanted to do, and it probably was not even available to me in those days. This is in the 1980s
Because
when
it was
medical
because
schools
you
were
had
not
already kind of
taking
gotten
older students,
too
right?
old for that.
Yeah, they felt that if you're going to go to medical school, they want to make sure you practice medicine for
And
50
besides, you
years
could
or something.
memorize anything, but you couldn't stay up all night to be
That's
a resident, right?
that's
So
right. I wasn't having any parts of that. So so medicine did not interest me that much, but science certainly did. And so I applied to a bunch of places, got turned down a lot of places because I was 35, 36 years old, which in those days was weird to be a graduate
mhm.
student at that age. But somehow or another, UC Berkeley, your place
Go
too.
Bears, go
Yeah,
Bears.
yeah, they said yes, and I like to joke. I think as a result of a clerical error, but but that's okay. I immediately grabbed onto that because I like the Bay Area and I want to stay there anyway. And so I did my PhD at Berkeley, where I also had a wonderful mentor, a fellow named Frank Werblin, who's now retired but is still a close friend, remarkable scientist, and I owe a great deal to him. I owe a great deal to all my mentors. I've been
hmm
very, very lucky, I suppose. I mean, you hear these stories about mentors that don't do don't care about their students or I don't know what it is. I don't understand that. To me, it's the most important part of the job, and it's why I'm who I am because of the mentors that I've had,
And most successful people point to a mentor or two who actually made it
Yes.
their job to,
Yeah.
to be there as a kind of advisor and model, and they're the ones who make the difference often.
Yes, and to put you out in front and to whatever
Yep.
support is necessary and all the rest of that. So I was quite lucky, and also as a postdoc with Gordon Shepherd, who passed away 2 years ago, a year ago. But Gordon was wonderful that way. So I've been very lucky mentor-wise. Um, so I thought, well, I got accepted to this neuroscience program. So that was part of why I was going into neuroscience. But also I thought, well, what's the most sort of interesting thing in animal behavior and neuroscience? Where do those two intersect the most? And I thought, well, olfaction is an interesting area. Animals are very olfactory driven, so I thought at the time, and that's sort of true. Um, and this is an area that's really not, at that time, was not that well studied. I mean, I wouldn't say it was understudied. Well, I would say it was understudied. There were people in the field, but it was not like vision. I mean, there were thousands of people studying the visual system or memory or something like that. Those were all the hot fields. Olfaction seemed to me to be intriguing in two ways. One is I thought it had something to do with animal behavior, and I could always go back and do more animal behavior work if I did olfaction. And two, it was kind of wide open. The big questions were still there. I mean, it was a small field, and so there were lots of big questions available, and so it attracted me that way. I like big questions.
Hmm.
I'm not that
Hmm.
good at little tiny questions. There are people who do that. I mean, I learned that there are a lot of scientists who love to just, dot the I and cross the T and get it to the eighth decimal place, but that's not me.
So you've already intimated that although you went into the study of olfaction in part at least because of your interest in animals and the importance of smell for, as you imagined it, animal
Yes,
life. And I know you over the years have had dogs, and I've had dogs. I have a
that's right.
Labrador, and the nose seems to be the most powerful organ at and drives a lot of my dog's behavior, or
Yes.
so I think. But you intimated that you have come to, after you doing actual research, believe that in fact it's a little bit less of a dominant sensory
Well,
apparatus than you had originally thought.
yeah, well,
Was I overreading your comment before, or is that in fact where you came out?
no, I'd say that's true. I mean, for dogs, I think olfaction is a dominant sense. It's not, we think, for people, but we underestimate our sense of smell. We believe that it's nowhere near as good as a dog's, and that's not actually true. We're pretty close to, not all dogs. Some dogs are actually bred, I mean, bloodhounds and all the rest, that kind of thing, are really bred for that. But a lot of it, I mean, I always say, everybody thinks dogs have a great sense of smell, but if you had a really good sense of smell, would you do that greeting thing they do where they stick their nose like right in there? You'd think you could do that from 2 feet away if you had a
Well,
really good sense
I
of
thought it was
smell,
because
right?
they actually like that smell,
Well,
but
that could be. That could be. So I don't know. I've never tried it, so I can't tell you.
fair
I have
enough.
no intention of trying it
I
either.
thought you were an experimentalist too, but
But there are limits.
got it.
Um, So I think the difference is, yes, behaviorally, dogs care about smells. They get a great deal of information from them, and so they're willing to put their nose where the smells are. We walk on the biggest problem with our sense of nose. We walk on two legs. We walk on 2 feet, and so our noses are stuck 5 feet up in the air when all the good smells are down near the ground. I mean, their molecules have a weight to them, and they tend to be near the ground. If you and I got off our seats right now and sniffed around on the floor, you'd be shocked at what you could smell. We met each other. We shook hands. We could have smelled each other's armpits. I'm sure we've gotten some additional information from that. Things I probably don't want to know. So we didn't do
Too
that.
much information.
That's exactly right. But I mean, so dogs do need to be close to the odor in order to
Hmm.
detect or discriminate it. It's just that they're willing to do that, as are many other animals. So it's not that it's not a dominant sense for them. It's just that we here's the one last example about the sense of smell for us, I guess, is that during evolution, when our faces became flatter, so we don't have the long nose of a dog or other animals, and we also don't have the big jaw of a chimp or orangutans, our closest primate relatives. Um, but we have this flattened face, and as our face flattened out over evolution, a whole slew of things happened to our jaws. It's actually thought to be very important for our ability to speak, why we can form words and so forth, which, for example, chimpanzees can't do. They can learn linguistic things to do sign language and all that, but they cannot actually make human languagey sounds. Um, Also, a little opening appeared at the back of our throats that has a direct access to the olfactory tissue at the top of your nose. It has the unfortunate and ungainly name of the retronasal olfactory pathway. And what happens is when you put food in your mouth, so we have taste, but taste is really five things: sweet, sour, salt, bitter, and savory, or umami, as it's sometimes called. That's it for taste. Everything else is flavor, really. And flavor is about 80% olfaction. But it's not that you smell the food through your sniffing it on the way into your mouth. It's once you put the food in your mouth and you chew it, ideally with your mouth closed, of course, you release all these molecules and you build up some pressure that sends all of these molecules up onto your nasal passageway, and you smell the food and you sense that as flavor. And so once you put the odors near the nose, we do have a great sense of smell. And you could make an argument that we may have the most discriminating palate of any animal on the planet. I mean, your dog may have a great sense of smell, but as you know, he or she will eat just about anything.
Yes,
So,
indeed.
discriminating palate is not what you would
Yeah,
call
well,
there.
my dog eats food so quickly that there's no
There's
way
no way,
she
right?
could make a choice about
No,
whether she wants to or not
that's
because
right.
it's already not
Yes.
just in the mouth, it's in the,
Yes. Yeah, so
yeah.
they'll sniff it, and if they sniff it and think it's edible, they just gobble it up. There's no flavor issue as far as we know with dogs. There's taste, but no flavor. So anyway, that's why.
But you also raised another question that I wanted to ask you about, which is to the extent that one is able to understand these things, and obviously having experiments where one smells armpits and the like may not be something that you'd get permission to do by a human subjects
Yes.
review board. What do you think are some of the most interesting components of smell in terms of how humans do react to each other or to environments in which they enter or operate?
Well, yes. So we of course, it's one of those senses that we tend to take for granted because it's always there. It's kind of there until you lose it, as we saw with COVID, where people would lose their sense of smell and kind of complain bitterly about it. They would say, "Oh my God, the world is just
Well,
not the same
people
place."
were saying that they lost their sense of taste.
Yes, which they often did not. What they did was they
Interesting.
lost their sense of flavor. So if you went to those people, if you went to any of those people and you put a sugar cube in their mouth, they would taste sweet. If you dropped lemon on their mouth, it would be sour or bitter. If you wanted to use whatever other thing, salt, you put salt on their tongue, they would definitely taste those 4 or 5 things. What they were missing was flavor. And that's because they didn't have a sense of smell. Their sense of smell went away. Fortunately for most people, it came back. It's in some cases came back weirdly. They get what's called a parosmia, which is you regain some part of the sense of smell, but not all of it, and then you wind up with these weird smells. Things don't smell like what they should. So the most common reported one was people would smell a piece of meat, or they'd go to eat a hamburger and it would smell like gasoline, or kerosene, or
I
something
see.
like that. So
Which would put you off the burger.
yes, very much so, very much so. I there's some hand waving here a little bit, but I think it's kind of related to the phantom limb issue. So when the brain doesn't get the full message, it makes up stuff to figure, to complete the picture. So people who suffer loss of a limb often have this problem with a phantom limb where they sense that the limb is still there, but it's often painful. It's often being twisted or put in a weird position or something like that. And for whatever reason, the brain makes things up and it always makes negative things up. It's never like, oh, my hand feels great, even though it's not there. It's always something weird. So in the absence of input, it makes up things. It hallucinates, if you will, in a sense. Because remember,
Like large language models and all the
yes,
rest of it.
it's the same thing. I mean, in the end, your brain is trapped inside your skull in this very nice warm place, but it has no direct access to the outside world. Everything it knows about the world, it gets through these little holes in your head and the skin that covers your body. And whatever input comes through those, these specialized tissues that send it information about smells or photons, vision or hearing or things like that. So in the end, it does have to kind of make the world up to some extent, right? I mean, as a simple and quick example, there is no such thing out in the world as color. Color is something we entirely make up in our brains as a result of having 3 receptors in our eyes that are sensitive to 3 wavelengths of light. And we interpret those as red, green, and blue. And then we mix them and make a lot of other colors. But there are other animals. Well, in some cases with us, if you're colorblind, you only have 2 of those. And so there are colors you don't see. There
Mhm.
are other animals that have 4 or 5, 6, and even more different receptors, and they see colors we don't see. In particular, insects see in the ultraviolet, and we do not. So there are many white flowers that actually have brilliant patterns on them if you look under ultraviolet light.
But I just want to stop for a second because the field of neuroscience has been for years, but it's becoming more interesting almost by the day, given the kinds of measurements and images and technologies that allow us to see
Yep.
and evaluate and locate and so on various elements of brain function. But of course, we also think these days a lot about neuroscience in relationship to computation and in particular artificial intelligence and all of the
Yep, yep.
that was my aside, but all the kinds of worries about AI making stuff up, hallucinating, and so on and so forth. And in fact, this is a trait that seems to get worse as the models get better, as they get more
Well,
powerful.
because they're learning
Makes
from us.
one wonder, yeah, well, first they might be just, doing what we do, and that's, after all,
Yes,
we are their training set.
yes.
But by the same token, if their capacity to sort of take on the world as an embodied, as we are, creature is obviously limited, or at least constrained by the fact that we haven't yet invented the robots that would
Hmm.
simulate being in a human body. Partly, perhaps, that is because their inputs are, limited in terms of how
Yes,
they can actually intuit the world beyond
yes. That
sometimes, as you said, making it up. Does that?
I think that's probably correct. Yeah, I mean, they make it up the way we make it up, and I mean, this was some of the early missteps in this. These sort of what was the Google one? I forget the name of it now, but became rapidly racist, for example.
Yeah, the
Um,
almost immediate
yeah,
bias.
yeah. Well, where do you think it gets that from?
Well, of course.
It's like one of your kids suddenly saying some really bad word, and you go, "Oh, where did she hear that?" But you know damn well where they heard it.
Indeed, indeed. So, look, there are endless questions that come to mind, as it were, when we think about the brain. But I'd like to hear you address one of the kinds of questions I know that is very much in the news these days, and it has to do with the aging brain.
Mm,
Now, I exercise on a regular basis. I try to exercise my mental faculties as well as my physical faculties, such as they are. And I do all this because I like to do it, but I also do it because I'm now reading that this is, at
yes,
least in part, along with a good diet and perhaps a few other things, the best way to control for the aging of the brain. Uh, but again, some dramatic statements are being made about everything from the onset of Alzheimer's to its actual symptomology, with respect to how one cares for the brain, uses the brain. What How do you parse through? I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that gets put out on the media, and it's very hard for the non-neuroscientist to really make sense of it.
it's really
So
hard
you're
for a nerd.
here, and I want to try to,
It's
use your.
it's it's not much easier for me to make any sense of it either. I mean, you can have a little bit of an intuition about it. This sounds too good, or this sounds too easy. Uh, I, I I don't mean to be a pessimist about this particularly. I think anything that you can do to, improve your general overall health is likely to improve the general overall health of your brain as well. But, like everything else, it's going to age and it will just age. And I like to say, we tend to lose everything as we age. Everything diminishes except weight. As far as I can tell, one can continue to gain that without limit, it seems. Um, but
With wisdom as
yeah,
well.
yes. But everything else, I mean, at some level, there's just, I think, only so much you can do. And it can become a bit of a cult or a fad or a source of tremendous amounts of misinformation and pseudoscience and people hawking things. So there are a lot of those dangers about it, I feel. Um, because in the end, we have to be realistic. I'm sorry. I mean, none of us wants to be demented or go through that
So you don't think we're
Alzheimer's
going to get
thing
to
or
the
any of
point
that.
either
But
that we'll be able to live forever,
uh,
or download a fully functioning brain
I don't
at
know about
age
downloading or
120?
any of that kind of stuff. I do think we could live much longer. I mean, that's somewhat controversial. There's a question as to whether or not you can actually extend the lifespan more or less indefinitely. Um, you know, we haven't done really much of that. We've extended the lifespan for more people, and so we have this average lifespan that's gotten much longer. But that's just because fewer infants die, frankly. I mean, there were people in the whatever 1500s that lived to be 90, so there's still people that live to be 90. Um, some of it's just dumb luck and some of it's genes and it's all these different things and it's hard to piece all that together. On the other hand, I do think it's possible that we could find ways of living longer. A lot of it is just simply curing disease. So I mean, nobody used to die of cancer because nobody lived long
Hmm.
enough, or very few people lived long enough to get cancer. And people who did live long enough to get it, somehow or another were vaguely immune to it. They didn't get it, and that's why they lived so long. So, or heart disease is another one. So many people died of heart disease in their 40s or 50s. People die of cancer now in their 70s or 80s typically, on average. And so, yes, if you found a cure for cancer, I think we would all immediately begin to live 10 or 15 years longer.
But if we
So,
did, then the question would be, would it be the brain that would be the ultimate limit?
right. So that's always, you don't want to be Methuselah, right? I mean,
Well, you don't. But here's another question for you, and then I want to talk a little bit about some of the books that you write to address questions about science more broadly. But there seems to be a test out there that you can take that would indicate whether or not you have the early stage,
yes.
some early stage Alzheimer's. And what do you think about that? And and if you think it actually is an accurate test, do you think it's an advisable test?
I can't imagine. I personally, I mean, it's not my field, the
Yeah, yeah.
Alzheimer's research and all that, but I don't believe we have a clear enough handle on the cause of it or the causes of it to be able to detect with great surety any but the most obvious sorts of cases, the most obvious kinds of things that may lead to it or may lead to some dementia at least. Um, I do know that, for example, one of the early symptoms of Parkinson's is supposed to be loss of your sense of smell. So people who lose their sense of smell, there's a certain fairly large number of them who go on to develop Parkinson's, or having developed Parkinson's, they realize that, oh, they lost their sense of smell. And we now know that that is indeed an early marker of Parkinson's before many other symptoms show up. The problem with that is the loss of sense of smell can have many, many causes that have nothing to do with
Hmm.
Parkinson's.
Hmm.
It can be simple sinusitis, it could be a virus, it could be a bang on your head that you don't even remember, but knocked things around just enough. And so, or it could be simple aging that has nothing to do with pathological aging, just simple aging. And so now people lose their sense of smell and they get terrified that they have Parkinson's or they're going to be having Alzheimer's or all the rest of this. And that's not good. That's not useful.
Well,
So,
that's why I asked about the
yes,
advisable part because,
right.
it's not always clear to me that knowledge is a
No.
useful,
No, especially when you can do,
accompaniment to a good life.
no, especially when there's kind of nothing you can really
Yeah.
do about it, right? I mean, what are you going to do? You
Yeah.
know?
Well, all right. So on that note, let's
Yeah.
let's turn to talk a little bit more about science. And a few years ago, and I think this was published just about the time you were also chair of the
Yeah,
Department of Biological
2011 it
Sciences,
would have been.
2011.
Yeah.
You published your first sort of popular science book,
Yeah.
or at least
Yeah.
a
You
book that
call it
was
that.
intended for
For
readership beyond
yes.
the people who would read you in Nature or
Yes.
Science or
Yes.
whatever, on
I don't even
ignorance.
I'm not sure there are any people that read me in Nature or Science, mind you, but yeah, for the few who might, yes, this
Yes,
book was
yes,
not
yes.
for them.
This was not for them, but it was about ignorance,
Yes.
and I happen to know that it was also a course that you taught at
Yes.
Columbia. But tell me a little bit about the origins of the idea of ignorance, both as a topic for a course, but also then as a book.
Right. So it started as a course, and it started as a course because I was also teaching. My actual job there at Columbia was to teach a course called Cell and Molecular Neuroscience, or Neuroscience 1. It was the first semester of a two-semester sequence of neuroscience for students who were planning on, they were biology majors. They were planning on going to medical school or graduate school. So this was a major. So it was a fairly intense course. We used this textbook at the time written by actually three famous Colombian neuroscientists, or at least edited by them, written by many people, called Principles of Neuroscience. And the book, I'm fond of saying, was 1,414 pages. The Amazon shipping weight was 7.5 pounds. To put that into perspective, that's twice the weight of your brain. So, and here was a book on the brain. I'm thinking, you get a hernia carrying this book around. This can't be right. So, and I gave 25 lectures and I would try and fill them with a lot of facts because that's what I thought the kids were paying for and that's what my responsibility was. So I was teaching this course. At the same time, I'm running a laboratory and I have 8 or 10 graduate students and a couple of postdocs. And, the lab discussions were exhilarating. I mean, I loved the lab. I'd get in early in the morning, I'd stay till late at night. We'd discuss all the things we didn't know, the stuff that we wanted to figure out, how to design this experiment or that. It was exhilarating and a lot of fun. And then I was teaching this course, and the course was challenging and satisfying in some ways to teach students and so forth, but I wouldn't call it exhilarating. It was kind of dull, to be honest with you, and I'm sure it was dull for them as well. And I thought, so what's the difference here between the way we pursue science and the way we teach it and perceive it? Because I thought, well, these students must think by the end of this course that they look at this book and they must think, oh, we know everything there is to know about the brain. It's 1,400 pages, 7.5 pounds. And that's what science is about, is finding these things out and putting them in textbooks to make students' lives miserable to read this stuff and have to, quote, memorize it from before. So I thought, well, so what is the difference between the way we perceive science and the way we actually pursue it? And I thought, well, the difference is that when we pursue it, we're interested in what we don't know. I mean, when I go to meetings with colleagues, we never talk about what we know. We go to the bar after the sessions and we schmooze about the things we don't know, the important questions that are left and how we're going to get to them and what we could do about them. So it occurred to me, maybe it would be interesting to teach a class that was just about the questions, not about the stuff that we know. Um, and so that's what I thought I'd try and do. So I started this class quietly initially. It was just a small seminar class. I advertised it, with some posters. And the idea was I would invite members of our Columbia faculty, our science faculty, to come in and met once a week for 2 hours and just come in and talk to the students about what they didn't know. So there'd be no PowerPoint, no lecture, no presentation. It would just be a conversation between me and this person and the students. They would join in about what they didn't know, what the big question in their lab was, or what the multiple questions in their lab were. How did they choose that question? How did they come to that question? Why not this other question? What are the other questions? What will happen if they answer this question? What will happen if they never get an answer to this question? How many questions have they answered? How many more questions do they have? All of these sorts of things. You like big questions, little questions, tractable questions, impossible questions. It turns out science is a very, very idiosyncratic practice. And that scientists are very idiosyncratic. Some of them like big questions, some like little ones, some tractable ones, some really, it's all kinds of different ways of doing it. And it was an eye opener for me. And it was also, I think, what was wonderful was when you ask people to come in and talk about what they don't know, they don't have a jargon for it. They don't have a quick, they don't have a patter. They don't have a lecture they've
They
given
don't have a
already.
stump speech.
Right. And so they really, it used to be that, so I'd call people up on the phone, I'd joke and I'd say, hi, listen, I'm running this course on ignorance and I think you'd be perfect. Well, of course, as soon as I explained it, they realized, yes, yeah, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love
Yeah,
to do
yeah.
that. And then, a week before they'd call me and say, well, should we maybe get together? Maybe you can tell me something about, well, what do you want me to prepare? And I'd say, no, I don't want you to prepare anything. I want you to walk into this the same way you walk into your lab in the morning. And don't worry about it. I'll take care of you. So I would start it off with a few. I'd always have 10 or 12 questions that I would have for them to ask them if we ran aground, but we never got to them. We never got to them. We got to the first one or two, and then the students would join in, and suddenly 2 hours would be up, and we'd have these marvelous conversations.
Now, of course, when you describe the course, a famous quote from Donald Rumsfeld comes to mind,
Yes,
having to do with the known unknown,
yes, and the
or the known
unknown.
knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown unknowns,
Yes,
and so on. And of course, there are these different kinds of things we don't know.
yes,
And, surely in the course, people would begin with a bunch of stuff they didn't know, but they'd very quickly turn to the stuff they don't know that they actually think they could either find out or that is important to figure out if you could find
yes,
out if you want to figure something else out.
yes, yes.
Did you was there a kind of pattern to the way in which
Yes, and
this process of ignorance worked for your
in
colleagues?
fact, the whole unknown unknowns, the things we didn't even know we didn't know, led through that class, but led to the second book, Failure. Because how do you get to so first let me say, by the way, that Rumsfeld did not make that up. I mean, it's an old saying, for one.
Yeah.
I mean, he used it, he was ridiculed for it. It's actually not that stupid a thing to say
I thought it was one of the smarter things he did
that he
say,
did
but now I
say.
realize he
It,
just
unfortunately, it was
plagiarized
about
it.
one of the stupider things to have done,
Yeah,
which
well,
was
that
have that
indeed.
ridiculous war over there.
Yeah.
But well, the earliest written version of it that I have been able to find actually is by another D.H. Lawrence, the poet, who wrote a long narrative poem called Heaven and Earth, I think, or something like that. And it's about the transition from this life to some sort of an afterlife. And somewhere near the end, there's a stanza verse that goes something like, here I was with my hand outstretched, touching the unknown, the real unknown, the unknown unknown.
Oh,
And
really?
I think he must have gotten it from somewhere too, but I don't know where. Anyway, the question then is, yes, so how do you get to this really deep ignorance, the unknown unknown, the stuff you don't even know you don't know? And I would say the best way of doing that is failure. So you do an experiment because you don't know something, and you doesn't work. It fails. You either get a result you didn't expect, or you get no result. It didn't work, or whatever. Now you have to go back to the beginning and say, oh, so there was something I didn't know here. What could that be? I mean, what other earlier experiments can we now think to figure out how to get to this one? And that's why failure is such an important part of science as well. Not just because you learn from your failures, but because that's data. That's real data that is about the unknown unknowns, the deepest kind of unknowns. So I think failure is, of course, a marvel, and mostly in science. I mean, I know there's a lot of stuff on failure now and how important it is to learn how to fail and persevere and all that. I don't think failure in science has anything to do with perseverance. I think
Hmm.
it's motivation. When an experiment fails, you are really motivated. You don't go, "Oh, that didn't work. I'll try something. I don't know. I'll come back tomorrow. I'll try it again." No, no, no. You really want to know,
It gets
why
your
didn't
attention.
that work? Yeah. I think it's Isaac Asimov who said, what any scientist who looks at data, new data, really wants to hear is not eureka, but, oh, that's weird. Because that tells you something is
Yeah.
strange, something new and interesting is going on.
So let me ask you this, because of course, I have talked to scientists for whom failure is not only, as you said, something that happens routinely, but it's also something that is a really important part of what happens routinely, and it's how you make progress and so on and so forth. But leaving aside the kind of perseverance talk around failure, getting back on your horse, and so on and so forth, there's a balance, and when you're a student, graduate student, postdoc, you don't want to fail all the time,
Right.
because that usually doesn't work out so well for you.
No.
You want to have a certain amount of failure.
Yes.
How do you think about that balance between failure and success?
It's a very important question because I agree. I mean, if you think failure is important, then it's a legitimate question to ask how much? How much can you fail? Surely I don't think it's 100%. I agree. That wouldn't work out so well. You have to be very clever to make that work out
Yeah,
really
that would
well.
be a hard
Yeah,
career to
yeah, that'd be
really
tough.
put together.
Um, but I do think we significantly underestimate the amount of failure that's acceptable. So I'll use as an example from nature. Look at evolution's top predators, the kings or queens, if you will, of the jungle or the air, the land, the sea, sharks, killer whales, tigers, lions, whatever you want. These top predators. So you may think, as I did, I will admit, that anytime one of these guys gets hungry, they just go out and bag a little snack, just chase something down and kill it and eat it. But there's a vast literature on this, a predator prey literature. And if you go into that literature, what you learn is that these top predators are successful on fewer than 25% of their attempts. 75% of the time they go chasing after something, it gets away, which is why there's so many animals still out there that haven't been eaten. Um,
The law of the jungle has percentages.
Yes, yes. And
Yeah.
so now it's true if you're a prey animal, you can kind of only fail once. That's pretty much the end of it. But for predators at least, they make quite a good living. They're the top of the evolutionary, ladder here, as it were. Well, there's no ladder, but the top predators, and they fail 75% of the time. We're in the middle of baseball season right now, and a great hitter has a batting average of about 300, which means they
They're predators.
yeah, they fail two-thirds of the time they come to bat, and yet they make 14 or 15 or now $20 million a year. That's pretty good for failing 65% of the time. So I think one of the things we do is we underestimate
Hmm.
significantly how
Hmm.
much failure we can, in fact, operate with, and that we should therefore allow ourselves more room to fail, more time to fail. There's a great quote I'm just going to throw in here very quickly that I love to use. Is from the always enigmatic Gertrude Stein about failure, in which she says, "A real failure needs no excuse. It is an end in itself." It's a little hard to get your head around that, but I think it's an important idea. It's not, oh, gee, I'm sorry I screwed that up, or I'll try harder next time, or this or that. It doesn't need an apology, and it doesn't have to lead to anything. It doesn't have to retrospectively be useful. Oh, I learned something from that, or I won't make that mistake again, or something like that. That's all fine. But it can also be an end in itself.
So let me ask you a little bit about uh, the translatability of this insight, as it were, into one of the fundamental things that is required for science, and that is support, funding. Uh, my understanding is that when you write a successful grant application, you have to actually be able to point to a few successes, and that for the most part, you get better grades or better
Yes.
scores on your grant application if
Yes.
you actually are building on success. How when you're involved in this, in both your own grant writing, but also in your mentoring and advising of postdocs and graduate students and so on, how do you advise them to to figure out? And again, it's a balance question, not in terms of percentages, but in terms of the focus that they need to put on
Yes.
both what they learn through failure, but also what they're able to build on in order to have the success they need for actual funding.
Yes. So of course, the rules of this game seem to be changing right under
Well,
us as
that's
we sit
that's
here,
where we're going to
right?
go
But
next.
so, okay.
Yeah.
But so the way it's been, I would say I had a discussion about this very question with Sidney Brenner, who was a very famous molecular biologist, Nobel laureate. He died a couple of years ago, I think. Um, he responsible for RNA and many other important discoveries. Anyway, we were talking about funding, and Sidney, who's always a bit of a joker and somewhat sardonic, said, "Well, NIH grants, they come really in two halves. The first half are all the experiments you've already done, and the second half are all the experiments you're never going to do." And that's the way you write the grant. And to some extent, there's a kernel of truth to that. You propose experiments that to some extent you've, if not done, you've gotten a lot of the data on them. You're ready to publish them, basically. So they've succeeded at some level, and there's something there to go on. And then you propose other experiments that you may or may not be interested in, but sound doable, sound like the obvious next set of experiments to do. And then the grant is typically given for 5 years, and you come back 5 years later with a new set of results. So in some way, the system, although it looks like it's set up to be based on your success, your current success, and where you're going to go, it's really almost a payback.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
paying you for what you've accomplished, and then you get to go on for another 5 years. I mean, that's kind of the way it's always worked, basically.
Yeah. Well,
In fact, I
right.
mean, that's not the way it says it works, but that's in
No,
fact the
but I
way
mean,
it
you
works.
have to have something to measure and you have to have some
Yes,
idea of
yeah.
funding. Although, it's always good to be able to point to other sources that might be more interested in funding failures or a higher ratio of failure.
So that
I
would,
went to a
yes,
foundation once, looking for money for research at Berkeley at the Keck Foundation, and they said we actually are looking for people who have failed in
yes,
interesting ways, but
yes,
it's rare.
yeah. So I joke about this. It's not really a joke, but up until now, at least the NIH has always had, they're very proud of this. They claim that every year, typically somewhere between 3.5%, 4%, something like that, let's say 3.5% of their budget is devoted to high risk, high impact
Right, right.
work. That is things that are more than likely going to fail, but if they succeed, they would be really important. And my response to that is, does that mean that 96.5% of the budget is devoted to insignificant crap that's just incremental science and doesn't really make any difference? Because that seems to be the opposite of what we should be doing. The high impact, high risk is what we want to do. And we don't need a ton of success. We actually need very few things to succeed
On the one
to
hand.
have a bounty,
On the
right?
one hand. On the other
Yeah.
hand, when you start listing, and we have been seeing lists recently for obvious reasons, of the kinds of achievements, the accomplishments, the findings, the discoveries of federally funded research, the list is endless. I mean, the
Yeah.
kinds of
Yeah.
things that we know that we wouldn't have known without the kind of federal support that was put in place
Yes.
after World War II. So we're coming close to the end of our discussion today, of our conversation, but I'd like to hear you say a little bit about the importance of research and what's been happening to you and your colleagues and your
Yeah.
students, and what we might be able to do to get things perhaps a little better back on track.
Well, the second part of the question,
That's a hard one.
if I
That
knew that, I would not be sitting
well,
here right
if
now.
you know that, we'll bring you back for a second
Okay.
podcast.
Okay. Um, Surely it seems a disaster. It's a tricky bit of business. If we have been sitting here a year ago or 2 years ago, and the topic of NIH had come up, we would be saying things like, well, there's an institution that really needs reform. It's all incentivized the wrong way. It's over regulatory. It's inefficient. It's this, that, the other thing. So we would all recognize that there was a necessity for reforming this institution. The problem is this doesn't seem to be a sensible way to go about it. On the other hand, it's also true, one has to admit, that administrator after administrator or administration after administration has tried to reform NIH and kind of gotten nowhere
Hmm.
because the bureaucracy does have a tremendous inertia. And so, it's hard to claim this is 100% wrong, even though it clearly feels very wrong because it feels so chaotic. And it seems to be in the hands of people who are so clearly enthralled to pseudoscience, to foolish ideas, to not sort of the not have a faith in the infrastructure of science, to mostly keep you from being wrong. Not always, but you can rely on it. I mean, we've had this infrastructure that we've built up over many years, over centuries, in fact, and have really built up in this country since World War II to feel like there's something you can rely on. It gives you the optimism, if you will, as a working scientist, to know that here's a structure that you can rely on to keep you from fooling yourself in a way, as Richard Feynman famously said.
Hmm.
And that seems to be being taken out from under us. And that's kind of a mistake. That partnership just shouldn't go away that quickly because I think if it falls apart, it won't be easy to put back together again. I mean, it's a Humpty Dumpty problem here.
No, no, indeed. And we are looking at a lot of things breaking and no plan for
So it
putting
seems,
things
right?
back together again. In any case, Stuart, we've come to the end of our podcast.
This
Thank you
happened way
so
too
much
quick.
for joining us. It's been great to see you and chat a bit. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. We hope you'll join us again for future episodes
I would be
of
very
Shaping Science.
pleased
And
to.
Stuart, we hope you'll be back to talk to us some more. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. This is wonderful.
To learn more about the New York Academy of Sciences, including information on upcoming events, visit us online at nyas.org and follow us at NIAS Sciences. Shaping Science is made possible with the generous support of Tata Sons.